Hello. So I have talked a lot about the story grid on my channel. My most popular video of all time, with over 11,000 views, is called When the Story Grid Doesn't Work. I will link it above if you're interested. In that video and in all my other videos, I've never bashed the story grid. I continue to credit them with teaching me how to write good scenes, and the podcast and the book and the blog were key factors in my biggest writing inflection point so far. However, I am not a die-hard story grid fan. You know, I take it with a good amount of, I would say, skepticism. There's a lot of stuff that I don't use because it doesn't resonate with me, like the concept of an avatar. This is not the way of the water. I love writing to that soundtrack, but no. So when Savannah Gilbo, a story grid certified editor whose podcast I also follow, reached out to offer an early copy of her book, a masterwork analysis of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, published by the Story Grid, I was a bit surprised and honestly nervous because what if I didn't like it? But you know, in the 4 years I've been on YouTube, I have spent a lot of money on craft books, and the fact that someone offered one to me for free was insane. So I took her up on it and I read it, and I'm super happy to get to now review it. So this is what we're doing now. I'm going to explain what the premise of this book is, address what I learned, sort of the structure, what kind of content is in here, talk about the pros and cons, and finally tell you, does it do what it says on the tin? So does it do what it promises, and where it fits in terms of other craft books. I have, again, reviewed a lot of craft books. The playlist is going to be linked up here and below if you want to check it out. And just to note, this book is not associated in any way, shape, or form with J.K. Rowling. So she does not get any profits, pushback, anything from this. It's completely independent. So, what is the premise of this book? The story grid, we're going to go back in time to figure this out. Okay, so the story grid started as a book and a podcast and has evolved into a publishing company and a learning program called Story Grid University. The publishing company publishes these story grid masterwork guides, which all have the same basic premise, which is to do a deep dive of a well-loved and popular book, scene by scene, breaking it down in terms of the story grid principles. So this one is obviously analyzing Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It was written by Savannah Gilbo and edited by Abigail K. Perry. I've also reviewed the Hamilton Masterwork Guide, which was written by Abigail K. Perry. It was great. You can see that again, linked below. So, the book. Let me paraphrase the back copy for you real quick. So, Harry Potter, obviously a massive success, and a lot of writers wonder why. Like, why is it still relevant? How did it become a hit? What can we learn from it? So answering these questions is basically what Savannah set out to do. She walks through the first Harry Potter book scene by scene, pointing out how Rowling delivered on and exceeded readers' expectations. Now I'm really quoting verbatim here. Built an immersive story world full of compelling characters, consistently raised the stakes in an appropriate way for middle grade readers, used red herrings to pull off an awesome plot twist, and more. I don't know what this is, but air quotes. So while it explores how and why the story grid, or how and why Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone works, it's definitely a guide for writers, right? So you could read this and just be like, oh wow, like really interesting why this works. But it's really meant for writers to take things away from it and to learn how to improve their writing using Harry Potter. To quote, again, if your audience wants to write stories that will stand the test of time and surprise and delight readers, this book will give them Savannah's best tips and strategies for doing so, even if they're brand new to writing or have no idea where to start. So that's what we're looking at. A book that gets into the how and why of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, while also giving takeaways for writers. Just a note here, the book is actually called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is like the name of Savannah's book, but I am Canadian and I cannot say sorcerers. I don't want to. It's philosophers. This was my cover, and I feel like we're all very attached to like our covers of the first version of each book that we got, and like this was mine. This is like the OG tiny British bookstore cover, and it says Philosophers, and so I just can't. So I'm just gonna keep saying that, and it's fine. So how does she do this? How does she figure out the how and the why and the takeaways and all that? The book is structured in 2 parts. So there's like the macro part, which is an overview of the genre and the story principles and all that stuff. And then there is the second part, which you could call the micro part, which is this deep dive scene by scene analysis. So like analysis and specific notes of every single scene in the book. The first 3 chapters of the book, so this is the macro section, part 1, are called The Truth Is, Welcome to the Story Grid Universe and How to Read This Guide. These are all the same across all masterwork books. Basically, if you've read one, you've read them all. So I don't read that. I skip it. The Truth Is one kind of confuses me sometimes. Anyways, read it if you've never heard of the story grid, but then keep on going. Then we get to the introduction, which is mercifully short and gasp, actually it has good stuff in it, which is one of the few times with a craft book I'm not recommending skimming and skipping it, like actually read it. Because she like explains the premise, basically what I just told you, but then she actually does a really great breakdown of what Harry Potter is about externally, like surviving, and internally accepting yourself and having the courage to take action. And she gets into like meat right from the very first chapter there, which is amazing and never happens in a craft book. So like amazing, like 10 out of 10 out of 10 introduction right there. The next 2 chapters are about the action story or the action genre. So she talks about the framework and the conventions. These are not done specifically to Harry Potter. It just goes over the story grid view of the action genre. They're great chapters. They're concise. Basically, they're the same as the story grid webpage on the action genre, which is fine. She gets into lots of detail later. I will be honest, this current version of the story grid action genre page I do not quite like. There are versions from pre-2022 that I think are better, and if you go in the Wayback Machine you can find those, and they go in more depth. That's just a side note though, like for the purposes of this book, everything that is on the Wayback Machine pre-2022 action genre webpage is in fact covered, plus a ton more in this book. So this is just an introduction. It's a good setup. It's just a side note that I'm a little, like I like the old web pages better. The next chapter is world building. So this one's really great because I love how Savannah keeps connecting the story elements, like the school setting, to the core conflict and to the core conflict, to the external and internal journeys of the book. So how the school setting, for instance, creates natural obstacles for Harry. And so, for example, if you're learning to not rely on adults, like school is a really hard setting to do that because it's kind of set up so you do rely on adults. She gives a lot of great advice in this vein here. She gets into purposeful world building, touches on the learning curve concept, which I appreciate, and the learning curve for different audiences. Great chapter. These are all also short chapters. They're like 4 to 6 pages. They're quick, bite-sized, easy to read. The next chapter is character development, where there's a big focus on the hero, villain, victim framework. I like that she talks about those major roles. I think that's great. Again, it's very relevant to the action genre. And she talks about how these roles can change between scenes. Great section. The plot catalysts, plot catalysts. Can you say that once? One time fast, plot catalysts. This is the chapter that was the most new to me and had the most like new information in this macro section, which was amazing. I hadn't heard the term plot catalysts before, which might be because I'm completely incapable of saying it. These are things that arise from the environment to create conflict and put pressure on the protagonist. She talks about the 3 main catalysts in action stories and notes where they come in Harry Potter, which is great. Again, you see in this section, as well as for like the whole book, it is so well exampled. I don't know if example can be used as a verb. We're going with it. She explains like the concept broadly. She gets into more details about it. and then she provides the example right away, right there. It's awesome, a great setup. The next chapter is called Obligatory Moments. This is a description of what the obligatory moments in the action genre are, and then how they apply to Harry Potter. It's an interesting one because some things, like the inciting incident, which in an action story should be a life-threatening attack by the forces of antagonism, they're not filled exactly in the Philosopher's Stone. So she explains Rowling's kind of unique take on them, how she still fulfills them, even if it seems like she's not filling them, which is great because I think that a lot of writers, by the nature of their stories, have challenges fulfilling these in like the exact traditional way. So understanding these sorts of variations, super valuable. Finally, we have the 20 skeletal scenes chapter where she maps out the 5 commandments for the 4 acts of Harry Potter. This is all extremely useful. However, so in the how to read section, which I did not read, but I didn't read in full, I skimmed it briefly. It does suggest doing an analysis of every scene in Harry Potter yourself before you read it. I am not patient enough to do that, so I did not do that. But I would say if you don't do it for every scene, at least do the skeletal scenes outlining. So the 4 acts and the 5 commandments of storytelling for each act. If you don't know what those are, check out the story grid. So do that yourself before reading hers to get the most benefit out of it. I think that's a fairly good, like depending, I guess, on what you want to learn. Like if you want to focus on value shift and the 4 core framework and story event and stuff in a scene, then you should probably do at least a few scene by scene examples yourself. If you're more into sort of the macro, then doing this 20 skeletal scenes, skeletal, is very valuable. So there is a do-it-yourself element to this where, because StoryGrid has this framework. It has the 5 commandments of storytelling, and then it has the 4 core framework. And so because these are going to be applied to every book and then to every scene of every book, it's almost like when you read one of these, you're reading like the answers to a worksheet. It's much better than that, but like in a really good way, you're reading the answers to a worksheet. So it is more valuable, just like in school, if you do the worksheet first and then read the answer key instead of just reading the answers, because you get less out of it. Does that make sense? I hope so. The last little bit of the macro section is just, basically some pre-analysis business, and that's just to prep for the micro section. Fun side note, she has really great insights throughout this whole thing, and there's little tidbits that I love. Like, for example, Act 2A always kills me. In the 20 skeletal scenes section, she explains like how 2A should be structured in a way that I think really makes sense. Also, StoryGrid has the terms middle build for 2A and middle breakdown for 2B. I like that as well. Like, it feels better than fun and games and bad guys close in my opinion. So there's more of those like terms and just all these nuggets in there. So then we get into the scene by scene analysis section, where we go through every scene of the book. So that is not chapter, but scene. So sometimes there's multiple scenes in a chapter. And for each scene, she has a summary of that scene. She then does the 4 core framework to identify the story event. She then does the 5 commandments of storytelling, and then there are miscellaneous notes. Generally, I find the analysis, like the 4 core framework analysis of a character's tactics, which is like how is the character going about getting their goal, and then figuring out the value shift in a scene. Again, if these terms aren't familiar to you, check out the StoryGrid website and the resources, their YouTube channel, etc. Also, you might want to understand these a little bit better, because even though there are descriptions in the book, if you're completely new to these terms, you probably want to have read some of the StoryGrid stuff, like some of the blog posts, etc., before you get into it. Otherwise, you'll be confused. So if you're confused when I'm saying these things, you probably want to read some other resources before reading this book, if that makes sense. So anyways, those two sections, it's the second and the third question of the 4-core framework. I find them very instructive because it can be tricky to see how values can shift in different kinds of scenes, like in a quieter scene. And it's just very validating to see that sometimes, not in every scene, because the main scenes need to turn and shift that core value of the genre. It can just be helpful to see, oh, okay, so they went from like untrusting to trust, or from like knowledge to ignorance to knowledge, or something like that. Like small shifts count. So that's that bit. And then we get to the notes. So like in Hamilton, if you saw my review of that, I think the notes are where some of our real gold gems are here. And again, these notes are miscellaneous, so I'm just gonna list some things that they cover. The viewpoint character's goal in every scene, the tone or sort of writing conventions, the voice that they're using for a particular scene or particular section, world building seeds, curiosity seeds, the sort of iceberg approach to world building, how Rowling introduces and teaches us new terms like muggle, how Rowling handled scenes with similar value shifts back to back to back, and how writers can then handle those. That was really interesting stuff. I keep an eye out for those mentions of value shifts and kind of for how things are combined into like beats versus scenes. Some of that analysis, all that analysis, really helpful. She does a lot on setups and payoffs, pointing out, when something is mentioned that's foreshadowing or that will come up later, even if it's in a different book. And all of this, again, is connected to your world building, to your characters. She talks about how Rowling uses dreams, since there are a lot of dreams in this book, pros and cons of the POV, and how Rowling overcomes challenges with the third-person limited that she's in. Tons of nuggets there. It's great. Read them. Read the notes. It's probably the best part of the book, where the real meat is. As an example, like in scene 43, Savannah explains how even though Harry doesn't have the main crisis in a scene, scene 43? No, scene 3. She explains how Harry doesn't have the main crisis in the scene. The crisis is whether the Dursleys will take him to the zoo or not, but because it impacts Harry, whether or not he goes to the zoo, and the global story, it still works. And this is super helpful for writers who struggle with the occasional scene where the protagonist doesn't have power. So it's really great how she'll identify where a writer writing this book would have had challenges with like traditional means, or would have had challenges meeting the conventions, or challenges meeting the requirements of the scene, and analyzes how Rowling overcame it. So those bits, which are very much like problem solution, all in context, are the best parts of this book, in my opinion. They are so valuable. Okay. So now we are getting into the pros and cons. We're 19 minutes into this video, so I'm just going to tell you right now, the answer to the question, does this book do what it says on the tin, is yes. It's exactly what it says it is. It accomplishes exactly what it sets out to do. So if you heard my description at the beginning and you were like, that sounds like something you would like, then buy it. It does what it says it does. It is very good. Its specific pros and cons. I always start with tone, because the tone of some craft books drives me bananas. This might be the best tone of any craft book I've read recently. I think Hamilton also had a similar tone to this. But these master book guides, it's so not annoying. It's amazing. Like, it's not fluffy. It's not condescending. It doesn't shame pantsers. Looking at you, story engineering, that whole book was just like, pantsers, bad. And it doesn't do the thing where they're like, I know, you're probably sitting there cowering over how hard all the things I just said are, but don't worry. Like, it doesn't do any of that. It's like, it's direct, it's straightforward. It avoids the overly theoretical and cerebral tone that StoryGrid sometimes adopts. And it is the information. It is there. That all help books, craft books should be this like straightforward. We don't need the fluff. Cut the fluff. This is a great example. There's no fluff. We get to the point. There was an introduction that didn't have fluff. Like, that is completely unheard of. Gold star for the tone. Amazing. Mwah. Next pro. This book is the ultimate example. You have one analyzer going through an entire book like this, looking at the principles, looking at the macro story and the micro story. This is awesome. This is, the best way to learn how to write a book. So many times you are just getting little snippets of examples, or in Save the Cat, which is great. I love Save the Cat. You're getting examples from tons of different books. But this is such a different way to look at it when you're looking at the whole thing together. I think you can get so much more from it, and it can be so much more instructive because you're trying to write a whole book, not just an opening or just a premise or whatever. Like, we're really getting the whole shebang here, which is great. A con of this though, you should know that the text of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is not in this book. There's actually a section in How to Read, like a few lines that say the bolded words in each scene correspond to a particular element of the spreadsheet, but there actually are no bolded words because it's chapter summaries, not text. If they had the text of Harry Potter, I imagine it'd be massive, humongous copyright issues. So there's no text. I think this is a missed detail, like the thing that the How to Read says that, but like it could be misleading if you're just flipping through the first few pages. So like, just know you need to have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the book, yourself. It is not in this book. Yes? Cool. Okay. Pro and con number 3? Pro 3, yeah. There are truly a ton of insights here. I've said it many times. So many small pieces of advice in context with an example right there. She also doesn't just analyze, but she makes the writer takeaways like explicit. Like, she literally says, don't forget to play up similarities and differences between your protagonist, or when writing your own stories, consider what you want readers to be curious about at the end of every scene. Like, she's very explicit with the takeaways, which I appreciate it. The con to this is that the advice is organized according to the structure of the book, which is the Harry Potter story as a whole. So it's harder to go back and find. Like, in some craft books, if I want a refresher on character, I would just go to the chapter on character and I would read through it and I would see all the examples and everything right there. This book isn't that. Like, you can't find everything about character by flipping to a specific page because it is in context, which is why it is so great. So it's important that you're intentional with your note taking and you're highlighting as you go through it. So it's easy for you to reference later. And then pro and con number 4 is there are some truly fun Harry Potter nuggets in here. There's lore. She points out that there's like theories that like Ted the newscaster from chapter 1 is Ted Tonks. There's thread connecting. Like, as a fan, it's just wonderful. I put in notes like she truly, like, she is a Harry Potter fan. She is a fellow Harry Potter fan. She loves it too. Like, it's there. It's great. It has nuggets. It's fun. It references like things in the news. Like, it is awesome. So fun. The con to this one is that in scene 17, she confuses occlumency and legilimens. She says that Snape is an occlumens, except in that scene, he was actually being a legilimens because he was penetrating the mind, not blocking the mind from penetration. You know, the details. Massive problem with the book. I mean, don't buy it because there's that one mistake. Obviously, I'm kidding. That's extremely nitpicky, but I did just want to say that, like, I did notice that. As like a fan thing. Readers are crazy like that, I think. So, where does this fit in terms of other craft books? This is an example book. It's a great one to read when you're getting ready to analyze one of your comp titles, for example. It can teach you how to use a masterwork appropriately. It's not walking you through how to write a book step by step, but it has great insights. I think you can enjoy it at any time in the writing process. However, I would say the best time to read this is actually after you've written your first draft, in that break before you start revisions. And I would go through it slow, take notes, and connect it back to your story, especially when you see those writer takeaways. Make sure you're jotting them down so you can then go and check for your story that you are meeting them. All in all, I am so thankful to Savannah for the free copy of this book. I really truly appreciated it, and I'm glad it was good and I didn't hate it, because that would have been very awkward, but I knew I would like it because Savannah Gilbo is great. Her podcast is called Fiction Writing Made Easy. You should go check it out. All in all, if you like this video and you like videos of this style, please give it a thumbs up. It tells me you want more of this. Let me know what you think about the story grid and these masterwork style books in the comments. If you'd like to see reviews for any other craft books, let me know. Tell me what books do you want me to read, and then report my findings to you. So shout them out in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Nicole Wilbur, and see you next time.